title of the message this morning is Do Not Forget the Cross. And we do have some slides. Do not forget the cross. Let me explain why I have this as a title today. Back in 2014, many of you remember that we did this thing called 39 plus 1. And the 39 plus 1 was 30 days leading up to one very special day, which that year was Good Friday 2014. It was an idea that God had planted in my heart when we were in Alaska. We were sitting around the table having a chat. And I'd heard one girl from Honduras, and she talked about what had happened in Honduras on one particular day. And it made me think of the question, can a nation be changed in a day? And without getting into all of that and even talking about Israel, because we can get drawn into that, how Israel was established in a day and so on, even in our recent history. But that planted a seed in my heart. And so I began to think not just of one day, but of 39 days leading up to that one day being Good Friday, that full 40 days. And so we did this thing called 39 plus 1. And what happened was that we did crosswalks every day around the wall here between the Shankill and the Falls. We had people standing with a cross between the dividing gates here and up on Lanark Way, around at Carlisle Circus, and up between Ardoyne and Twaddell Avenue, because the situation was taking place even then. And so we were there for those 40 days for 2 to 3 hours a day, even standing with the cross as well as walking with the cross around the dividing wall. And we did other things during those 39 plus 1 days. In fact, memory serves me right, that was when we had our 40 hours of worship. We finished with 39 plus 1 hours of worship. We started, I think, Good Friday, 8 o'clock that night, and we continued with worship right through until like midday on Easter Sunday. It was an incredible 40 days. Several months after that, in November of that year, several police officers were attacked by dissidents from Ardoyne. And they were attacked right at the very spot where we had stood with the cross for those 40 days. They were shot at, they had grenades thrown at them. And so a few of us decided that we needed to go back and to, in some respect, reclaim that piece of land, that piece of territory. And we need to go back and bring the cross back. And that's what we did. We went back with the cross for 4 days. We went back on Tuesday and we finished on the Friday. And it was just those few days after the attack had taken place. When we got there, there were still sandbags around the area that had been damaged at that particular time by the grenades and so on. But we stood there with the cross for a few hours each day for those 4 days. Two of the people who were with us were John Edwards, and he was, I think, there on the last day, and Ronnie O'Neill. And Ronnie was very, very faithful. Ronnie was with us many, many times when we did crosswalks and cross vigils. Ronnie had been ill for many, many years. In fact, over the past couple of years, Ronnie passed away. But Ronnie was so moved and captivated by the cross and by this message that he even had his own cross made, and he stood for 40 days himself over between Short Strand and Woodstock Road. He's from East Belfast. And he stood there several times with that cross, and at least once, perhaps even more times, for 40 days leading up to Easter with the cross. And so Ronnie was with me for those 4 days, and it was on the third day, Ronnie had noticed this concrete block that was sitting behind us on a raised level. And it had been used previously by the police for a security camera. But now they have the big, massive cameras right in the middle of the little roundabout there between Twaddell and Ardoyne. So they'd removed the camera from this concrete block and they left a little circle in the middle of the concrete. And Ronnie just jokingly said on day 3 that we should get quick dry and concrete and place the cross in the hole that was on this concrete block. But he was to learn that you don't kind of joke with Jack when it comes to stuff like that, because I take things like that very serious. And I said to him, Ronnie, you know what? You may well be joking about that, but that's a great idea. That's a great idea. So we got this bucket of quick-drawn concrete, and on the fourth day, I stood with the cross like this, as if I'm just holding it as per normal, while Ronnie's pouring concrete into the hole. So I had it sitting there in the concrete, and he's pouring the quick-drawn concrete. So I'm standing like this, and it took about 15 minutes, and then we let go, and there the cross has stood from November 2014 until this very day. And many, many people have seen it driving up and down past Ardoyne and Todell on the Crumlin Road. And it's, if it could talk, it would tell some stories, because since then there's been serious riots right there at that very spot. They've had to put up screens. In fact, they literally put a screen right across, and the cross became the dividing wall. They left the cross on the Twadell side, and they had blocked off the Ardoyne side. And so the cross has seen many things over these years. But in recent weeks, I've been obviously drive up and down that way several times, 2 or 3 times a day, and many times throughout the week. And I noticed over in recent weeks that the cross was getting greener and greener and greener. That's not a political comment, but it was getting greener and greener and greener as the weeds grew up over the cross. And keep it on the first one, just so you can see how on the first one. All right, okay, my apology. Those are no. Go, oh, sorry. Okay, go back. No, go back to where the weeds are. My apology. One said first one. Okay, keep it down for a minute. So you'll see how the weeds were growing. Now, if they were left like that, then obviously the weeds and the nettles would just continue to grow and would completely outgrow the cross. If you go back to the slide so we can show John and Ronnie there, please. Just go back a bit. Okay. So that's Ronnie Neal to the right and John Edwards in the middle. John Edwards, great servant of God who served from Dublin, great testimony how God has used him across England, Scotland, Wales, here across the island of Ireland, and even in America. God has used him incredibly well. We've built up a great relationship, a great friendship over the years, and so there have been opportunities of us just getting together. So he was there that particular day. So seeing the weeds, I don't know what's happening in this, seeing the weeds and the what do you call the other things? Nettles continue to grow. So I decided to go back during the week. Go to the one place where we see the weeds and that cut down. Next one. Yeah. Now, I'm not a great gardener, you can see. Okay. So when I say I cut down the weeds, that's all I did. I kind of just cut them down so when you're driving past it, you no longer see the weeds and see the nettles, but you can see the cross clearly. So that's what I did during the week so that we could see the cross properly. But it made me think, even while I was doing that, while I was cutting back those weeds, it made me think how easy it is to forget the cross. I don't know how often that I would have driven up and down, would have driven past the cross. Sometimes I would have taken note of it, but I don't know over the past number of weeks, because it would have taken some time for those weeds to have gotten to that particular height. And so many a time, even I would have been driving past it and not seriously taking notice of it. And so when I cut down the weeds and I begin to see the cross, I know that more people can see it more clearly. It made me think of how easy it is to forget the cross. And so it gave me the idea for this message: do not forget the cross. Do not forget the cross. You know, when Jesus was crucified, there were many who stood before the cross and who stood around the cross. This was not something that was done in isolation. This is not something that was done in a corner somewhere so that no one could see and no one would know what was going on. This was done in full view of the people of Jerusalem and in full view of the Roman Empire. And so when he was crucified, there were many who stood at that cross. Some stood right at the cross. because they wanted to be there. And as they stood at the cross, they witnessed every passing moment of those several hours, 6 hours on the cross. And they witnessed every passing moment, right up until the darkness and through the darkness, until the moment that they decided to take the body down just before it hit 6 p.m. on that particular Sabbath day. I think from 9 o'clock to 6 o'clock, to 3 o'clock, and then 3 hours of darkness. And those who were stood before the cross, they witnessed every passing moment. They heard every spoken word that was said either on the cross, beside the cross, or those who were passing by. And what they saw and what they heard were things that would stay with them for the rest of their entire lives. They would never forget what they saw. They would never forget what they heard. I think we've all had days like that. Days that we will never forget. Maybe some days you'd want to forget, but days that you just want to hold on to, days that you want to remember because they were so precious to you. But while some would want to hold on to that day, others would want to forget it as quickly as they possibly could. And even on that day, some would just walk on by, just walk on past, not thinking that if ever there was a moment to pause, if ever there was a moment to stop, even for just a minute or two, and take note of what was going on, if ever there was a moment to pause, that was it right there and then. But many chose to keep walking by. They failed to recognize that this was the most momentous moment in history. I mean, this was going to change the course of history. Nothing was ever going to turn back the tide of what took place on this particular day. That the life of Jesus would be remembered 2,000 years later, that would still be singing songs about him, would still be opening up churches across the world to commemorate this man who lived his life among humanity and who died upon this cross. That even time itself is measured, taking us back to the life of Jesus. Some of the tweaks and cameras and the calendars, we understand, doesn't get it exactly right, but before and after Christ. His very life, his birth, his death, even marks time itself. People didn't realize how momentous a moment that was, and so many would fail to understand and appreciate how precious a moment that was, and so they would just walk on by, because for this was a moment, for them this was a moment to forget rather than one to remember. Some walked past in silence, while others raised their voices to comment, and often those comments were quite negative as they decided to have a go at Jesus on the cross. Some were too busy to stop, while others just couldn't care less. For them, this was just another day in Jerusalem. This was just another execution taking place outside the city walls of Jerusalem. This was common for that particular time. It was like Belfast in the 70s and the 80s. What you woke up to in the mornings, what you heard before or even while you were sitting down to have your tea at night. Another death, another execution. But while many passed by, there were those who remained around the cross. And they did so for different reasons. They were there because they wanted to be there. They were there because they had to be there. They were there for different reasons. There were his accusers who had to keep their eyes on him. They were the ones who accused him. They wanted to make sure that this man is dead and gone. And so they would keep their eyes on the cross, making sure he stayed there, making sure that nothing happened, making sure that he would actually die on that cross. And then there were the Roman soldiers whose job it was to make sure that he was actually dead. And so they were there because they had to be there, but they remained focused on the cross. That was why they were there. And then, of course, there were some of his friends, some of his family members. and some who were right there at the very foot of the cross. And they were there because they were saddened and broken at the fact that their loved one, their friend, was even on the cross. Why is this happening to him? And they found themselves at the foot of the cross that day, which was not something that they had planned even 24 hours previous to this. They chose to remain with him throughout those last hours of his life. That's what family does. That's what friends do. How sad when someone, whatever the situation, passes alone. And here was Jesus hanging in this cross, facing death, humanly speaking. But he was not alone, because there were those who were there because they wanted to be there. Not that they could bring much comfort to him, but the fact that they were there gave him a different focus from the cross. John mentions 3 of those as women. They're referred to as the 3 Marys, plus himself, because he's writing the story. A couple of verses, John chapter 19 and verse 25, just takes us to the cross. And John 19 verse 25, we read, near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, woman, here is your son. And this was not him in any way degrading Mary. This was an endearment, an endearing term that he used. Here is your son. But he wasn't referring to himself. He was directing her attention and her thoughts to John, the disciple who was next to her. Here is your son. And then to the disciple he said, here is your mother. And from that time on, this disciple, not that disciple, this disciple, because it's John who's writing, this disciple took her into his home. It's what they did. They looked after their loved ones, even in death. Jesus was making sure that in a very practical way that his mother was being looked after. But there they were, they stood at the cross, they were unable to ease his pain, but just being present during those final moments would offer some, if not much, but some comfort to him. For them, the cross was a painful reality. This is not just something they would read about or write about. This is not something that they would sing about in a song. For them, this was a painful reality. They were right there at the foot of that cross. There was a moment in history when this actually took place. And these people were right there before that particular cross. And as they stood or as they knelt beside the cross, they heard and they saw things that they would remember for the rest of their lives. They'd followed Jesus from Pilate's palace. They followed him through the streets of Jerusalem, even as he fell under the weight of that cross. They followed him outside the city walls of the old city of Jerusalem to the place called Golgotha. They saw his broken, bloodied body being trailed through the dust. They saw him being thrown down on top of the cross. They heard the thump of the hammer as they came down on the nails into his hands and into his feet. They watched as the cross was being lifted up and then being dropped into the socket in the ground, hearing the thud of the cross finding its place in the ground. And there was nothing that could have prevented any of these dear ones from seeing and hearing sounds and sights that they would never, ever forget. See, they not only saw the actual bloodied body of Jesus on the cross, but they were to stand and listen to the abuse that was being hurled at him also, to the ridicule that came from those who passed by. He saved others, but himself he cannot save. They're mocking him. Well, they remembered what he did in terms of moving across the cities, the villages and the towns, and preaching sermons from boats and from mountaintops, and all the stories they heard about him. He had his critics, those who would come against him, would not believe that he was who he said he was, and others who claimed that he was indeed the Son of God, the Messiah. And now they see him on the cross, so they continue to hurl insults at him. Oh, look at him now. All this talk about him saving others, and he can't even save himself. They mocked, they spat on him. And those at the cross, they heard people laugh. And yet in the midst of this, they heard Jesus speak from the cross. They heard him say, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." They saw the two thieves, one on either side of Jesus. They heard one of the thieves as he turned to him, and he said, "If you are the Son of God, then save yourself and save us with you." He joined in with the mockers. It's not that he all of a sudden had his moment of enlightenment, that this truly is the Son of God. No, he was mocking. If you really are the Son of God, then save yourself, and while you're at it, then save us with you. But he knew that was not going to happen. Never believed it for a moment. He joined with the mockers. And then they heard the other thief turn on the first one and rebuke him. And they heard him say to him, "Look, we are receiving what we have deserved. We knew the consequences of breaking the law. We knew that this is the consequence. This is the final judgment in terms of what we have done, what we did wrong. We are being punished justly, but this man has done nothing wrong." And then they heard him turn to Jesus and say, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he did believe. He did believe. And then they heard Jesus say to him, "Today you will be with me in paradise." And that was fulfilled literally, because that day Jesus descended into paradise. Not going into that story. But that day, when that man closed his eyes on the cross and wakened him up in eternity, Jesus was there along with him. During his life on earth, he had saved many. Now he's facing his final moments, and he still has time to save this one thief hanging next to him. Still has time to reach out in that moment, his moment of death, to reach out and save one person beside him. And friends, that's saying to every one of us that Jesus has time for us as individuals, even just the one. I don't know if anyone's here tonight, this morning, that's not a Christian. You know, if we were all doing our job right as believers, this place would be packed with the unsaved. Maybe that's something we can look at as we move forward in the coming months and so on. But Jesus is interested even in the one. Jonathan, a couple of weeks ago, in one of the dedications, talked about how Jesus showed his interest in the children. We tend to think that he's only interested in the adults, and that therefore as church leaders we should only be interested in the adults and only be interested in those who tithe and so on. That's not the case. Never should be the case, and that was not the case with Jesus. And he shows his interest in this one person because he's always interested in the one. See, friends, we're not just talking here about a piece of wood. We're talking about a cross. It's something that became the most significant point of contact between heaven and earth, and we ignore that point of contact at our peril because it's the only one that exists. There's nothing else that exists between heaven and earth in terms of making the connection between us and God in heaven. That's why Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me." It's through the cross. This is the only point of contact between heaven and earth in terms of bringing that relationship. And so this is why it's so important that we don't forget the cross. The cross is where the price of sin was paid. That's why Jesus cried out on the cross that day. It was an Aramaic word that he used, tetelestai, and it's translated into English, it is finished. He spoke one word, and it literally means paid in full. We think it is finished, something, it's been done, everything's completed now. No, it means much more than that. If ever you get a bill back in the olden days when you had money in your pocket and you got the bill given to you, oftentimes they would get a stamp, put it in ink, and they stamp it and it said on it, paid in full. Tetelestai literally means paid in full. It's like Jesus is stamping history at that moment in time, and he cries out, tetelestai, paid in full. The price of sin, the price for sin is paid in full. It is finished. This was not a cry of defeat on his part. This was a shout of victory that echoed through the hill of Golgotha, that echoed down through the streets of Jerusalem where he had walked previously that day carrying the cross. Tetelestai. And he screams over every life in this place who's received forgiveness because of what he did that day upon the cross. It's finished. It's paid in full. Your sin has been paid for in full. Stop torturing yourself because of your past deeds, because of your past sins. Stop torturing yourself because of your past mistakes and failures. You've been to the cross of Jesus Christ. He screamed over your life, tetelestai, it's paid in full. Nothing left to pay. Nothing more to be added to it. It's paid in full. You are forgiven. You're cleansed by the blood of Jesus Christ. That's what Jesus is saying. Some of you look back and you say, you know, that meant so much more to me back then than what it does. I kind of sense that even now. That some of you, when you look back in your life, that there were times when it seems like you were closer or you were nearer to the cross than what you are today. But you've allowed the weeds and the nettles to grow. And so it no longer has the attention that it once had. And you remember whenever it meant so much to you, that you knew you were forgiven, you knew you were cleansed, but it's not as if that feeling has stayed with you all of these years. And for some reason, instead of standing near the cross and keeping the weeds and the nettles out of the way, it's like you've allowed them to grow and you don't see it as clearly as what you did at one time. The day you first came to Christ, it meant so much. But then the honeymoon period finished. And the cross was pushed into the background while other things remained at the fore. Other things remained up front. People know what foot you kick with. People know what team you support. People know what you work at. My neighbours know I'm a full Liverpool supporter. Don't throw the flags out the way my neighbour does. He's a Chelsea fan. I hate Chelsea. Because I'm a neighbour. I mean, he has 8, and it's my garden. I cut his grass for him. And he has the audacity when Chelsea's in the final or there's something happening to bring flags out, not only put them in his little piece of garden, but to put it in my big bit of garden right across the front of my house. He's no space in his garden for his flags, so he puts them in mine. And we all know, we know what foot we kick with, what team we support, where we work. We know everything about everyone. And people know those things about you. But do they know you're a Christian? Do they know you really follow Jesus? Do they know that you're carrying a cross? Not necessarily a wooden cross, but Jesus says that those who will follow him should take up the cross and follow him. Or there was a time when you were so near the cross that yes, that meant something to you and you want the people to know, but it's been pushed to the side while other things remain to the fore. And as the cross has been unveiled in this place this morning for these moments, and we're going to finish in a few moments, I want to encourage you this morning. I want to challenge you as a believer, as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus. I want to challenge you to clear the weeds and clear the nettles so that people can see that you truly are a follower of Jesus Christ. Don't be embarrassed about it. Don't be ashamed about it. I think it was last year I put this, you kind of feel silly sometimes. You put this thing out on Facebook and I challenged people to put a cross in their garden for Easter. I think only one person did that. And it wasn't me. I didn't do it. It was Kelly. She still got it there? Still there. In her garden, front garden. I didn't even do it. It's not a religious thing. But the people, and people shouldn't need a cross in our garden to know they're Christians. I'm not saying that. But do they know? And yeah, the old song says they'll know we're Christians by our love, but it's so much more than that. It's by our lifestyle, choices that we make, and how they see us respond and react to different things that are happening in our community and also in our lives. One pastor from Hillsong, and I'll ask the worship team to come to the platform, please. We're going to finish in a moment. One pastor from Hillsong who spoke in our church a number of years ago. We've remained friends with him through social media over the years. But he wrote on the post that he put out relating to this message, relating to the cross and so on during the week. And this is what he put on my post. He says, when reading your post, I was reminded of and started singing the song, at the cross, where I first saw the light. This is a Hillsong pastor. Being reminded of an old hymn, an old song. See, friends, sometimes we just need to be reminded. And maybe that's what's happening here right now. You're just being reminded of the importance of the cross. Don't forget the cross. You're being reminded. We need to be reminded because sometimes we allow the weeds and the nettles to grow and to hide and cover the cross that people should be seeing in our lives. And sometimes we put distance between us and the cross. It's not what it used to be. Things have changed. But today, we're reminded of what Jesus went through. We're reminded that some mocked and some laughed then, but also that some mock and some laugh today. And the mocking and the laughing is increasing. You only need to listen to some of these modern day comedians. And often they will mention the Bible. And they will do so in derisory terms. And often they will mention Jesus. And often they will mention Christians. Because they can get away with it. They mocked and they laughed then. And they mock and they laugh today. Others couldn't care less back then, and others couldn't care less even today. But then there are those whose hearts are touched. They're touched as they pause for a moment. And even for these moments we've been going through this message with you, I sense in my spirit that some of you, your hearts are touched as you consider afresh the cross. Because the moment you pause and you look afresh at the cross, then your heart is touched. They saw one who walked among them. They saw one who reached out and ministered to many who were needy in so many different ways, and how that he ministered to them. And now they see him nailed to the cross. the Son of God who loved us and gave himself for us, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, who has become the Lamb of God, who's taken away the sins of the world. They saw this with their own eyes. They witnessed it that day as they looked upon the cross. And I want to challenge you today, dear friends, to reach out. To reach out. Reach out afresh to the cross of Jesus. And if you're not a Christian, then reach out for the first time and take hold of that forgiveness that is made available to you through the cross of Jesus Christ. If you are a Christian, come on, get rid of the weeds, get rid of the nettles. Let people see that you really are a Christian. You don't need them to walk into every room singing at the top of your voice. It might help sometimes. It might even help you to do that, but you don't need to do that. Just live your life as a believer. Live your life as a follower of Jesus Christ. Live your life as one who knows that Jesus has called you to follow him. And he said, as you follow me, you take up the cross and you follow me. Many years ago, and I'm going to finish with this, as a young Christian, I listened to older Christians like Margaret McKee pray. Apology for that, Margaret. But I heard older Christians around me. Margaret was my age back then too. But I heard older Christians pray for the pastor. And they prayed, Lord, hide him behind the cross. Don't let anyone be seen but Jesus. And so there was times whenever I got a bit of boldness as a young Christian to stand up in the church and pray. I'd repeat what other Christians prayed. Didn't mean anything to me. I just heard them say it, so I knew it meant something to God. So I would say what they said. And so I also would pray, Lord, hide him behind the cross so no one will be seen but Jesus. And people, amen, Jack, amen. And then it dawned on me as I got older that oftentimes people reject Jesus because they reject the messenger. And oftentimes they reject the messenger because we're not presenting the message the way that we should be. And I began to realize that we need to be seen. That we need to be up front. That we need to be on the front line of life and the front line of stuff. People need to see us. They need to see how we cope with tragedies. They need to see how we cope with the circumstances. They need to see how we respond to the things around us and the things that come against us. They need to see it. My prayer for many years has not been, Lord, hide me behind the cross, but you make sure when I'm standing out that the people see how I'm standing. That's why Paul says, put on the whole armor of God, and having done all, stand. Even when the world comes against, when stuff comes against you, that you're still standing. Jim McConnell has gone to his reward today. It's because he stood faithful and strong all of his life as a follower of Jesus Christ. Not just as a pastor, but a follower of Jesus. God has called you today to follow him. Jesus has called you to pick up your cross and follow him. And if you need to get rid of those weeds, get rid of them. You need to get rid of those nettles, get rid of them. Alison McFarland, she put a little comment in the post as well, and it was something like, that's good, you can see it now. And you can see the difference when the weeds are gone. You can see the cross. That's good, you can see it now. What about the cross we're called to carry? Do people see it? Does the world see it? Do they see what we really are, men and women of God, young people of God? Don't forget the cross. Don't forget the cross that Jesus died on. But the moment you walk through those doors, don't forget the cross you're carrying. Carry it well. Carry it well.